Hello, my name is Joshua Sipper, Dr. Josh Sipper. I'm from the Air Force Cyber College at Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. This is my keynote speech for the IARIA conference this year in Nice, France. And since it's distributed, I wanted to make sure I had something to for everyone to view if they would like to know more about this particular concept of social media misinformation and human machine decision making systems. And this concept sort of grew out of an idea where I was reading about fast and slow thinking and how that could be applied to uh, this particular environment and all the different social media misinformation we're seeing, especially right now in the midst of COVID-19, et cetera. So here's a little bit about me. I won't read the whole thing to you. I will say that I've been at the Air Force Cyber College at Maxwell Air Force Base, Air University in Montgomery, Alabama, for a little over a year now, and I love it there. It's great. Have a lot of great colleagues there. And before that, I was at the LeMay Center for Doctrine, Air Force Doctrine Development and Education, and did some several different cyber things there, application development, and also some consulting on Air Force doctrine for cyber. I was there for 8.5 years, and before that, I was at the 26th Network Operations Squadron in Montgomery as well. For I was a cyber standardization and evaluation lead there, as well as helped develop the training program, write lots of policy. Was the cyber exercise manager, so there for about 6 or 7 years. Before that, I was with Lockheed Martin as an intelligence analyst, and before that was in the Air Force as an intelligence analyst, specifically electromagnetic signals exploitations intelligence. So my career has been very much technical in many ways, starting with intelligence and flowing in and through cyber. So that gives you a little bit of background about me. So today I'm going to go through a paper that I wrote that deals with social media misinformation, human machine decision making systems. And I'm just going to go straight through it. I'm going to give you an introduction, talk a bit about social media and misinformation, human and machine systems, human systems thinking, which is a bit different, has a lot to do with how we think and whether or not we're doing it well, and then some recommendations on how to do that better, and conclusion. So we'll just start right into this. So one of the most virulent and problematic issues facing human beings today is misinformation generated for the purposes of misleading, influencing, and distracting people from actual, valid, and reliable information. This reality has been experienced for some time, but has recently become even more pronounced with the global COVID-19 pandemic. While much of the misinformation is being spread through the use of machine bots, human decision making is also at the forefront, often from those who unwittingly propagate the invalid and unreliable data, thus perpetuating and adding credence to it. In this paper, the areas of social media and misinformation will be explored to gain more clarity regarding how misinformation is spread through social media using human and machine decision making systems. Additionally, human and machine systems will be discussed as a whole and be broken into two components in order to further explore human locus of control and system one versus system two thinking. Finally, recommendations will be given for how to mitigate and combat misinformation through refined human and machine systems. Misinformation through media, while not a new phenomenon, has become a pronounced and profound problem for governments, militaries, organizations, and individuals across the globe. This is primarily due to the reach of new media and the form of social media sites, blogs, and other widespread means of communication propagated through human and machine effort. Humans, whether wittingly or ignorantly, tend to spread misinformation based on reports from others they trust, are culturally tied to, or in response to others whose views counter their own. Interestingly, the misinformation humans spread often comes from machine bots designed to automatically disperse the data, which subsequently fools humans into reacting with a click, thus carpet bombing the internet with the misinformation. Many users who become part of influence networks may not realize that it is the case. The influence networks will use popular hashtags and topics to draw in more followers and amplify their reach. The danger of misinformation is obvious. However, the way in which it is transmitted and the fact that so many people are falling prey to it may not be so conspicuous. This lack of perspicuity has led to the rise of what Victor Pickard calls the Misinformation Society. In his book Anti-Democracy in America, he proposes that the diminished supply of reliable news media is a core contributor to the misinformation society. This tracks well with the trends seen across global social media and the blogosphere. As more and more information becomes available, the information can be skewed either intentionally or unintentionally by confirmation bias. More than half of blog readers seek out blogs that support their views, whereas only 22% seek out blogs espousing opposing views, a, a phenomenon that has led to the creation of cyber ghettos. In these cyber ghettos, political, social, and cultural conversations become drastically polarized, leading to the echo chamber problem that plagues so much of what has now become postmodern discourse, the emergence of what many characterize as the post-truth era. With no established foundation or standard of what is true or false, misinformation finds itself bathed in a nutrient rich primordial soup of mistruths, mistakes, and misappropriation of data. Unfortunately, the relativistic bent of social media, blogs, and quasi news sources has only enriched the misinformation catch pond, allowing for the metastatic proliferation of harmful data. Digital misinformation has become so pervasive in online social media that it has been listed by the WEF as one of the main threats to human society. The, the threat is real and it's growing, along with increased efforts such as those enacted by Russia in social media and election meddling to cause friction and distrust among the American populace. What all this amounts to is the largest integrity attack ever perpetrated against an entire nation. The idea that the sender can manipulate the way that the receiver interprets the realization of an information structure by changing the precision of the information structure. Not only is the information impact enormous, the psychological toll creates an avalanche of distrust in media sources, other Americans, and the American government. All of these issues together place misinformation in the place of a strategy whose damage rivals that of the most infectious of cyber attacks. Psychological warfare, inform and influence, using social media as the channel for disseminating messages whose objectives is to influence, change target audiences, opinions, beliefs, perceptions, and behaviors. It means achieving some military effect in the cognitive domain using misinformation, including disinformation and propaganda. Indeed, misinformation is a disease with no straightforward cure. However, there are ways to combat this malady, and some of those recommendations will be discussed at the end of this paper. Before these recommendations are discussed, social media and disinformation will be further defined and explored to gain insight into the full scope of the problem. Human and machine systems will also be examined to understand how misinformation grows and gains footholds. Also, human systems thing, I should say, will be analyzed to reveal how people contribute to the problem of misinformation and how they might also be able to be a part of the solution to this pervasive issue. So, social media and misinformation. Social media has been firmly placed in as the what in the lexicon of how misinformation is spread across the world. The various platforms, an exhaustive list which is not possible to render here, offer unprecedented reach into every area of human and organizational thinking. Of course, thinking generally turns into action, leading to consequences from the further spread of misinformation to violent outbursts leading to chaos, injury, and death. As the influence made available by the internet and its myriad applications, websites, and dark spaces continues to expand, the pestilence of misinformation will only grow more potent and damaging. The internet has revolutionized availability of information, however. It has also facilitated the spread of misinformation because it obviates the conventional gatekeeping mechanisms such as professional editors. Without the fact checking and through analysis of what information is being released, often information coming from popular, untrusted sources leads to misinformation. While some of this might be due to ignorance or mere mistakes, there is reason to believe that much misinformation originates from nefarious sources intent on shaping and distorting public discourse. Lee exposed the dangers of the former ignorance based misinformation transmission types in their study regarding information signaling. They make clear that during election campaigning, private voters often make choices based on information structures that often can be misleading, prompting voters to make decisions that are counter to accurate information, which has been distorted during the campaign process. Misinformation occurs when this belief differs from the candidate's private belief, as an incorrect belief is used by the voter to interpret the realized campaign signal. The incentive of the low type to misinform the voter in this sense is what drives the separating equilibrium signaling game. The signals being sent in this case are apparently deliberately malformed by the campaign and mistaken by the voters, who then perpetuate the information, causing a vicious and expanding cycle of misinformation, misinterpretation, and inappropriate signaling. Another more explicit form of misinformation has been and still is being undertaken by great power competitive rivals such as Russia. Over the past several years, the Russian Federation has engaged in an unprecedented effort to attempt to influence American politics. A key component of that overall effort has been focused on social media, especially widely used platforms like Facebook and Twitter. This type of cyber and misinformation campaign belies the fact that Russia senses social media is a tool that can wreak havoc, great havoc, upon the U.S. and its allies. Through misinformation campaigns, political discourse is thrown into a chaotic melee of misinformation streams from opposing political party echo chambers. The more extreme, the more effective at causing division and angst. What appears to be at the center of much of the division, however, is not necessarily the actions of Russia and other global competitors, but the irrational and unsteadying devotion of so many individuals to the polar strongholds they defend. More information regarding this underlying issue will be assessed later, but it is important to understand that without these entrenched and albeit misguided ideals, misinformation would not and likely could not spread as it does. Also of note is the interesting phenomenon of social media as a source and outlet for traditional media. While this mutually beneficial arrangement often leads to positive culturally, socially, and politically advantageous outcomes, it can also easily tilt away from the truth, even into destructive and viral malign influence. Information generated by a grassroots journalist can obtain an unexpectedly large reach. This can become problematic if the news appears to be inaccurate or simply fake. An excellent example of such misinformation is the Senator Serenga case, a sensational post on Facebook account on the Facebook account of a non-existent Italian senator, which was used and covered by several newspapers and turned out to be untrue. Other occurrences similar to this have been reported and are used as a means of discrediting traditional news outlets who should have checked their facts better prior to reporting. Although traditional news outlets still use qualifying terms such as allegedly, the release of such obviously reputation damaging information only serves to fuel the misinformation fire. As already polarized idealists continue their insistence of relying on disreputable news sources, they use the foibles of traditional sources to support their dangerous consumption and dissemination habits. Trump's election laid bare the structural flaws in our news and information systems. As mainstream news media sensationalized and trivialized what was at stake in the elections, social media amplified misinformation and propaganda. The issues with the election process, with Russian meddling, propaganda, echo chambers, and numerous other areas of information decay, were a call to action for journalists, politicians, and the American public. All at once, it became obvious how vulnerable and imprudent an entire country could be with one of its most sacred institutions. In the wake of so much upheaval and embarrassment, companies responsible for applications and services most regularly used for misinformation spread took notice and enacted steps to combat the issue. Algorithm driven solutions have been proposed. Examples are Google is developing a trustworthiness score to rank the results of queries. Similarly, Facebook has proposed a community driven approach where users can flag false content to correct the news feed algorithm. While these actions will undoubtedly help to impede misinformation, they are not enough to truly head it off. It is vital that in addition to human machine cooperation such as this, that human systems thinking be confronted to help people give attention to and grasp when information is amiss and what to do or not do about it. Ultimately, recommendations on how these strategies can be made a reality must be evaluated as well. In order to understand the misinformation problem, it's important to first see where misinformation originates and how it is perpetuated. Although it is true in most cases that misinformation comes from human invention and reporting, machines are increasingly taking up the chore of not only spreading misinformation but constructing and reporting it. These bots contain artificial intelligence functions responsible for actually finding the most vulnerable places in cyberspace to inject news that the that is either written or modified by humans and machines in order to twist the information for the purpose of influence. Artificial intelligence generally refers to efforts to build computers and machines able to perform actions that one would expect to require human intelligence, such as reasoning and decision making. It is telling that much of what passes for legitimate news on social media and in search engines is actually generated through human machine collaboration, which leads to eventual machine autonomy. It is in knowing this fact that the first steps can be taken to combat these attacks and actually inform those who are consistently falling victim to them and their malaise. The establishment and use of bots in sowing misinformation is really just the beginning of what is growing into AI that learns, reacts, and evolves to continue its mission to aerate and seed the vast landscape of social media. Some researchers have predicted that human and machine consciousness will become much more closely aligned in the near future, leading to an even deeper ability to create and work out problems. These machines would be associated with bubbles of experience in the same way that human brains are associated with bubbles of experience. The concept of bubbles of experience connotes a human or machine ability to draw from past understanding to make informed decisions about how to move forward with a task, narrative, or other complex mission set. With this capability integrated into human machine systems, the possibilities of misinformation creation and promulgation are virtually endless. On the flip side, however, the ability to combat misinformation can be greatly enhanced by human machine systems that can look for patterns, sense misinformation, and remove tainted data from social media sites and information systems. An important area of emphasis to be considered in relation to how humans and machines work together is how far the two may become divided heuristically. On the technical side, AI systems are black boxes that are not just programmed, but have learned. This means that it is impossible for a human to fully comprehend the computer's reasoning, which is particularly concerning in a system that could take life and death decisions. This raises the issue of human intervention and the place of humans in human machine systems. One must also be concerned with how humans about one must also be concerned with how machines should be managed and directed in order to ensure that information is not inadvertently misused or malformed. While one of the most delicious ideas for most humans who work through information system security and operational issues is the use of autonomous systems, the human factor will inevitably remain a key tenet in human machine systems. Automation will take over more mundane and repetitive tasks, thus making the role of human beings paradoxically more important in the decision making process. The pinnacle matter of human machine decision making is trust. With these systems, misinformation is at the center of the trust issue. How a person can trust the information the machine denotes is true or false depends on multiple factors. There are many components of trust that are relevant to man machine interaction. Trust between individual humans as trustee and trustor, between humans and computer automation, and between cultures in order to analyze the implications of trust on human machine collaborative decision making. Within this collaborative relationship, the trust piece is imperative and must be developed through experience as much as error checking. Misinformation is a central part of this equation, as the human machine relationship will rest greatly on the ability of both to catch, mitigate, and redirect the misshapen data. This becomes an even greater challenge as information flows freely and rapidly, causing an increased burden and cognitive load for humans in human machine systems. Machines can process large amounts of data and take decisions based on it faster than humans can. Warfare is speeding up so much that it may become too fast paced for humans. This fact necessitates additional systems, also AI enabled, to assist in the parsing of data and the extension of information analysis. In order to realize the military potential of human machine collaboration, collaborative decision making, and teaming, it is useful to acknowledge there will be a need for leaders to prudently face their trust in machines and AI. The operative concept here is the use of prudence when placing trust, leaving room for checking the potential space between human and machine interpretation and understanding of a particular event or narrative. In human teams, communication of confidence and uncertainty is crucial to both effective group decision making and trust collaboration, suggesting that effective human machine teaming may depend on the development of AI systems that know and signal when they might be wrong. Through this development of trust and action between human and machines, misinformation can not only be identified and combated more readily, the system rule sets and heuristics will become much more refined and effective. Human machine systems are an integral part of the future of misinformation as a growing problem, as well as a potential way to identify and ameliorate misinformation. With the rapid growth and application of AI, machine learning, deep learning, and autonomous agents within information systems, social media, and other information related sources, human machine capabilities will reach into new and difficult territory. Trust will continue to be an issue, as well as how human beings handle and relate to the information they and their machine counterparts process and disseminate. Ultimately, the onus will be on people to ensure information is accurate, timely, and resolved. This discussion will be more fully formed in the next section: human systems thinking. One of the most blatant reasons for the spread of misinformation is the human internet user. We as human beings are creatures of great critical thinking and irrational behavior. As a result, we often find ourselves betwixt the valley walls of what we know to be true and what we wish to be true, staring up aimlessly, wondering how we got there. All the human machine interaction, learning, and systems ever produced or ever will be produced are in vain if human beings cannot or will not change the way they process and analyze information. If a person chooses to believe that something is true or false, trying to get him or her to change is unfortunately often an exercise in futility. However, if human beings can at least be made aware of the way they seek and see information, a great service may be done in the journey toward eradicating misinformation. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, 2011, depicts two types of human systems thinking systems: system 1 and system 2. System 1, or thinking fast, involves instantly and subconsciously fitting what we see in our preconceived frameworks for how the world works. In contrast, system 2, or thinking slow, involves using conscious effort to question and modify instant perceptions and conclusions that get switched on by system 1. One can immediately see where system 1 thinking fits into the misinformation infection model. So many humans are unfortunately primed to jump directly to conclusions that agree with what they already believe, making system 1 processing an attractive way to think. This causes an echo chamber effect that serves not only to provide more support for their conclusions, but similar attitudes and discussions of others in their cohort who extend the misinformation further. System one could be called intuition. It works largely unconsciously and relies on instantaneous underlying associations. System two could be called reasoning and relies on the much slower process of reasoning. Intuition, in and of itself, is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, in many fast paced environments such as military operations, intuition is highly prized since decisions can be made quickly and with usually positive effects. However, these decisions are generally not based on a body of subjective information, but on deliberate training, education, and experience from years of being an operator. This construct does not hold true for most social media users, however. On the contrary, many social media users are misinformed, biased, and not educated about the issues they purport to understand or about how they even come to their often irrational conclusions. While we write, our brain has to juggle two separate processing systems, one for the immediate process of cranking out words, phrases, clauses, and sentences, a working memory, and one to draw from, our hopefully deep well of discourse types and subject knowledge, long term memory. And there's yet another harried mental character, called by some cognitivists the central executive, overseeing the entire process. This same construct is what experienced operators in the military employ when making fast decisions based, and this is what is most social media and internet users lack. Emotions also impact decisions, usually adversely. A study by Farrell et al. Analyzed System 1 emotional decision making and System 2 reasoned decision making and found that when financial managers had outcome based decisions to consider in their choices made for investment for their company, they almost invariably took the System 2 route. Managers may rely on emotional reactions to settle to the detriment of the economic considerations or System 1 processing, resulting in decisions that are costly for firms. While economic theory prescribes performance based incentives to align goals and induce effort, psychology theory suggests that the salience of emotions is difficult to overcome without also inducing more deliberate consideration of both emotional and economic factors or System 2 processing. The introduction of a positive or negative outcome into the decision making process then serves as a way to promote a slower, more reasoned, critical thinking process prior to acting. This is exactly the type of reasoned, intelligent way educated and informed internet and social media users would be expected to act when encountering information of any type. System 2 thinking has also been observed in the reasoned approach of experts within fields of study. Experts don't brainstorm a variety of responses, and they don't just jump accept to accept the immediate answer that comes to mind. Instead, they stop and engage their intentional and deliberate System 2 type thinking to simulate and visualize the outcome if they were to make that response. This habit of engaging System 2 is something that must first be taught to people who habitually engage only the System 1. Then it must be developed. Of course, people who choose to remain willfully ignorant of how to learn to think more critically will be less likely to consider the System 2 option. But even the smallest bit of awareness may turn the tide. Another area where System 2 processing has benefited professionals is in the sciences. This type of thinking does not only apply to those who practice various scientific disciplines, but also the general public who often glean misinformation regarding science from pop science blogs, websites, and other misinformation purveyors. Good science obviously needs a heavy contribution from the reasoning system 2 because the intuitions from system 1 are all too often wrong in the hindsight. This is important when dealing with disease outbreaks such as the recent COVID 19 virus. While so many opinions persist and many people spread misinformation discrediting the U.S. Center for Disease Control, federal government agencies, and the media writ large, hard science is often overlooked or downplayed. creating dangerous circumstances where medical information and warnings are either ignored or intentionally countermanded. Scientific norms for argumentation and verification are designed to make sure that System 2 has its say and that scientific knowledge claims are subjected to careful scrutiny that avoids errors common in System 1 thinking. With a more textured and articulate argument for attention to scientific knowledge and wisdom, one hopes that deleterious misinformation would be assuaged. Human systems thinking is a critical strategic component of countering misinformation. While the introduction of System 2 thinking is by no means an easy or fast means of subverting misinformation, it is critical to introduce this method of critical thinking into the lexicon of internet and social media users. Only through the deliberate and reasoned analysis of misinformation can humans produce a lasting, intelligent plan for the shrinking of the misinformation print. So here are some recommendations, a few to consider for how misinformation can be handled. Misinformation has a far and wide reach, rolling into and over every crevice of the internet and social media. It is a problem with no easy solution. However, strategies for combating misinformation can be developed and implemented to mitigate the worst of its reach and effects. The following recommendations focus on three major areas that are suggested for use in improving human machine systems and human systems thinking: education, policy, and heuristics. Education has been used in the past to great effect in combating prejudice, racism, and violence, and shows promise in the arena of misinformation. Through helping people to see their biases and habits and the potential damage of those faults, education guides the cognitive and affective senses toward understanding and hopefully wisdom. Policy changes and development regarding social media is another way for positive change to combat misinformation. Various approaches can be taken to encourage positive action and deter misinformation. Finally, heuristics are one of the more technologically and cognitively advanced options for stultifying misinformation. Information systems and humans alike can use heuristic analysis to more fully analyze and understand misinformation. Through consistently expanding a knowledge base about misinformation, a full understanding of how to slow and end it becomes more salient. So, first, let's look at education. Education is an area often utilized to bring about positive change after a crisis or in the midst of a societal or cultural struggle. As with the civil rights movement in America during the 1950s and 60s, integration and the racism that persisted, education within school settings, in literature, and through the media helped to make inroads and temper the conversation. Society, the world over, is at a similar juncture now with misinformation on the internet and in social media, specifically guiding conversations in various and often harmful directions. This has resulted in an unhappy tribalism among polarized political, social, and cultural camps that values identity over all else. Every individual employs her reasoning powers to apprehend what is known to science from two parallel perspectives simultaneously: a collective knowledge acquisition one and a cultural identity protective one. The natural tendency to rest on acquired collective knowledge is akin to System 1 processing and dangerous in its own right. However, the protection of cultural identity actually possesses much greater power and influence psychologically, as it tends to not only affect individuals directly, but also involves their closest associates and those who might see any disagreement as a betrayal and worthy of excommunication or, at the very least, ostracization. It is in understanding that and educating those affected by misinformation that these mindsets can be challenged and potentially righted. However, this is a difficult path, fraught with individuals and groups who might rather remain ignorant than ever admit a bias. It is hard, but education regarding bias and misinformation must begin somewhere, and the affective and cognitive spheres of influence are generally the best places to start. The Australian Defence Force is using education to combat social media security and misinformation issues. especially within the auspices of their community and business partners. For instance, social media graphics, which give instructions on how to interact online, may well be may be well received by partners. Partners who are active in their communities could share these graphics, which encourages others to engage in better practice. Through education, the tide may be turned as positive engagement and System 2 practices begin to encourage a cultural, cognitive, and affective shift toward more secure and thoughtful online and social media practices. Okay, now let's talk about policy recommendations. Various solutions regarding policy implications have been proposed to assist in fighting the spread of misinformation. While some are traditional carrot and stick, still others encourage international cooperation and development of norms consistent with the writing and education against uh, against misinformation. It is imperative that these countries launch a concerted international effort to share best practices and lessons learned. Time is of the essence. There's a global pandemic of misinformation that can be cured only through international collaboration and sharing of information. Other suggestions that may help along with this cooperative effort are issuing public statements regarding misinformation, educating voters about misinformation campaigns, and establishing a government media dialogue. All of these strategies linked together and stitched multinationally can go a long way toward building a strong, comprehensive defense and policy against misinformation. Specific action has been advised against great power competitors like Russia, whose countries whose aim is to divide and cause social, cultural, economic, and political erosion among the U.S. and its allies. Some common policy recommendations include establishing an Office of Foreign Influence to detect and monitor gray zone activity, drafting congressional legislation to combat online misinformation and propaganda, restrict the use of foreign generated bots and trolls, and build transparency in online political ads, and building resiliency via presidential actions by denouncing Russian activities publicly. While all of these actions may help, further policy has been recommended toward the information managers and providers themselves. Some suggestions include Twitter promoting fact checking content rather than paid ads, and regulate algorithms so that they do not micro target based on creating small information bubbles that fragment, atomize, and divide our societies. These strategies working together are likely to produce positive changes in how social media is experienced by reducing the echo chamber effect and allowing for more intercultural discourse, thus allowing for more information sharing and misinformation squashing. However, it will take a multi pronged approach using education policy and heuristic systems together to bring about the holistic change that is truly necessary. And that leads us to heuristics. Heuristics are often used in human and machine systems to aid in establishing reasoning sets for advancing and modeling behavior, used in identification of patterns, used in information security, information assurance, boundary protection, and various other system specific requirements. Heuristics are specific epistemic procedures that generate reasons for beliefs, both evaluative and factual. This is extremely important in light of how misinformation may shape heuristics in human and machine systems as well as human systems thinking. With learned information that is incomplete or false, any heuristic will be contaminated and potentially corrupted. Thus, heuristic analysis and understanding must be of great importance when establishing strategies for ensuring sound information insemination throughout social media and the internet as a whole. This can be aided through the use of countermeasures to correct misinformation and guide heuristics back onto the straight path. Once propaganda has been successfully identified, effective countermeasures should be deployed. Although psychologically countering recipients of misinformation is challenging, there are evidence based recommendations for doing so. Decrease the number of arguments supporting the misinformation, create scrutiny and counterarguments, and provide detailed corrections to misinformation. Through heuristics correction and guidance, specific misinformation can be subverted And those who were initially fooled by the information become more well prepared and armed for spotting misinformation in the future and adding to their own heuristic, the heuristics of others, and introducing the information into machine heuristic databases and AI constructs. This is seen in political beliefs and discourse, probably more than any other area. Humans are apt to produce political opinions not because of stocks of technical political knowledge, but because the human species is essentially a political species. We evolved in political environments and are naturally endowed with psychological systems for navigating them. By knowing these origins, we can utilize evolutionary theory to build testable hypotheses on the structure of heuristics that guide the political opinions of modern people. Through understanding ourselves and why we act and react the way we do to information, more heuristic growth and modification is possible. It is this tenet nocere that misinformation begins to fade into the background and allow truth to emerge and prevail. Social media and the internet content and internet content profusion has fundamentally changed the way human beings think, research, write, talk, and accomplish many other basic communicative functions. While this is not necessarily a negative change in human adaptive history, the insertion of misinformation with its constructions is so virulently pervasive and can spread so rapidly that one must question whether the positive capacity of this technological meta reality is worth the damage caused to the affective psychological understory of human conception. As human machine interfaces continue to meld and interact, misinformation will likely adapt and insert itself in different and possibly much more damaging ways, while simultaneously being vulnerable to the very system it leverages. Human beings themselves must also come to understanding that merely blaming misinformation on malign influencers does not absolve them of their responsibility to use critical system 2 type thinking and processing to overcome impulses that lead to increased damage to truth and honest, thoughtful discourse. The recommendations found here can assist in combating this huge and growing issue, but it will take a concerted effort globally, socially, and culturally to make a real difference. So I hope you enjoyed this take on social media misinformation and human and machine decision making systems and human systems thinking. And appreciate your attention. I hope that you have a really great conference at the IARIA conference. And hope you're all stay safe and are well. And look forward to hopefully seeing you in the future. So hope everyone has a really great day. Thank you so much.